He said she was just a friend going through a rough patch. Then Tiffany found the bank statements. 8 months, same account, every single month. That account had a name on it, and I knew that name. By the time I found out, I had already paid for it. Literally. Tiffany dropped that stack of bank statements on my kitchen table like she was setting down evidence at a trial, because she was. It was a Tuesday evening. I still had my scrubs on. There was a half-eaten container of leftover rice going cold next to my elbow, and my whole understanding of the last 8 months was about to get dismantled line by line. I want to tell you, I had a feeling. I want to say I knew. But the truth is, I was just tired. The way you're tired when you've been working too hard for too long and you've convinced yourself that's just what adulthood feels like. Here's what my life looked like at that point, so you understand what tired actually meant. Full-time hospital billing job. I'm talking insurance disputes, denial appeals, the kind of paperwork that makes your eyes cross by noon. Then on weekends, a part-time shift at a pharmacy 2 neighborhoods over, because 8 months ago there'd been a shortfall I couldn't quite account for, and I'd picked up the extra work to cover it. I owned my apartment outright. That was mine. I worked for that. And I had Camilo, who I loved, and who left little packed lunches in my work bag sometimes, and who I had been blaming exactly 0% for the exhaustion that was slowly eating me alive. Camilo had been unemployed for 14 months when this story takes place. 14. He'd lost the job in what he called a toxic work environment, which, fair. But what came after that was a kind of motivated stillness I mistook for recovery. He'd be on the couch when I left in the morning, laptop open, some podcast going, a half-wipe counter as evidence that he'd cleaned. He had reasons for every month that wasn't the right month to start applying again. The economy, his anxiety, the fact that the job market was weird right now. He'd say it so reasonably, in that gray hoodie, that I'd find myself nodding, and then somehow I'd be the one apologizing for bringing it up. What I can tell you now that I couldn't see then is that we had a loop I'd push gently, always gently, because I knew his history and I cared, and he'd go quiet in a way that made me feel like I'd just hurt someone fragile. He'd mention the anxiety, the depression, the way pressure made things worse for him. And I would back off because I loved him and I wasn't going to be the person who made someone's mental health harder. That's real. I genuinely believe that. But there's a version of that same story where someone learns exactly which words make you stop asking questions. And they use those words every single time. The money was a whole separate thing. I had done a very good job of not examining too closely. It had started small, a couple of hundred here when he was short on his half of groceries, a few hundred there when a bill came up and his account was between transfers, his words. He called it a loan every time, and I called it a loan too, but we both knew neither of us was writing anything down. Over 18 months, it had accumulated into a number I'd stopped doing the math on the way you stop stepping on the scale when you already know you're not going to like what it says. I told myself it was an investment in us. I told myself a lot of things. And then, about 3 weeks before Tiffany came over with the statements, something new happened. I found out through a mutual friend, not from Camilo himself, that he'd been describing me to people as difficult, demanding, someone who didn't understand what he was going through. The word gold digger had apparently come up, which I need you to sit with that for a second, because this man had not paid rent in over a year. He told me I wasn't affectionate enough, that I was emotionally unavailable, that he needed more from me. And somehow, this is the part that still gets me, I wondered if he was right. 3 weeks before all of this, I had noticed a line in the household account. Same transfer, same amount, showing up every month like clockwork. I remember thinking it looked off. I remember pulling Camilo in and pointing at the screen, and he barely glanced at it before he said it was a subscription bundle he'd set up, some streaming thing plus cloud storage. He'd show me later. He never showed me later. And I closed the laptop. I had a 12-hour shift the next day, and I was already behind on sleep, and I told myself I'd look at it again when I had the bandwidth. I did not look at it again, not until Tiffany did. Tiffany came over on a Saturday afternoon to help me pull together documents for a mortgage refinancing application. Rates had shifted, and she'd been pushing me to look into it for months, because Tiffany is the kind of friend who actually follows through on things. She showed up in a wrap dress with a print loud enough to wake someone up, locks pinned back, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a tote bag full of highlighters. She was methodical, she was thorough, she had reorganized my entire filing system by the time I came back from making coffee, and she was already 3 months deep into the bank statements before I sat down. She was exactly the wrong person for Camilo to have anything to hide from. She didn't make a big deal of it at first. That's the thing about Tiffany. She doesn't perform. She just went quiet for a second. Then she ran her finger along a line on one of the statements and she asked, completely casual, "Hey, who's Yvette?" And I stopped. Because I didn't know. There was no Yvette in my life. No Yvette in our life as far as I knew. It wasn't a utility company. It wasn't a business name. It wasn't an acronym. It was a first name spelled out attached to a recurring transfer that had been leaving our account every single month. My mouth said, "I don't know," and my stomach said something else entirely. My first move was to rationalize it because that is what you do when you're not ready. Maybe it was a family member she'd mentioned and I'd forgotten. Maybe it was a Venmo handle, some nickname for a service. I pulled up the explanation Camilo had given me 3 weeks earlier, the subscription bundle, the cloud storage, and I held it up against the amount on the statement. And it didn't fit, not even close. A streaming bundle is $15 a month, maybe $30. What I was looking at was not $30. I kept my face very still, the way you do when you're running calculations you don't want anyone to see you running. Tiffany counted them. She went through every statement without me asking, and she counted. 8 months, 8 transfers, each one within about $100 of what a studio apartment would run in the neighborhood across town. She knew because she'd looked at a place there 2 years ago. She set down the last statement, took off her reading glasses, and said, very flat, very even, "He's been paying somebody's rent." Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact she was placing in front of it the way you place a fire extinguisher in front of someone standing in a burning kitchen. The room went very quiet, and then I knew whose rent. I knew that name, not from a phone, not from a photo, from a single conversation 3 years ago, maybe our third date, when Camilo mentioned an ex the way men do when they want you to know they're sensitive about it. Yvette. He'd said it with this little pause, like the name itself deserved room. She went through a hard time. The breakup was mutual. She's a good person. I had nodded and felt no alarm whatsoever because why would I? She was the past. She had a name and a vague, soft backstory and absolutely no reason to be on a bank statement I was staring at right now. I picked up my phone and I typed 7 words. "Come home. We need to talk." Sent it, put the phone face down on the table. Tiffany got up without asking, went to the stove, and refilled both our mugs. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. The kitchen had gone very quiet in the way kitchens do when 2 people are waiting for a door to open and neither of them actually wants it to. I kept thinking, maybe there's a version of this that makes sense. I was still hoping for the version that made sense. He came in 22 minutes later. I know because I was watching the clock without meaning to. He had his gym bag on one shoulder, joggers, the beige hoodie this time, looking exactly like a man who'd just had a normal Saturday. He clocked Tiffany first, then the papers on the table, then my face, and I watched him make a decision in real time. He chose casual. He crossed the kitchen and kissed me on the cheek like a man who had nothing to explain, and I sat there and did not move one single muscle. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down, and he looked at the statements. I let the silence sit for exactly 1 breath. Then I asked him, as evenly as I could manage, "Who is Yvette, and why have you been sending her money every month for 8 months?" I had rehearsed approximately 12 ways to say that sentence in the 22 minutes I was waiting, and that was the one that came out. Flat, factual, no room in it for a detour. Camilo set both hands on the table, looked at me, and then, just for a beat, just a half second, he looked at the papers instead of at me. That little look, that one tiny redirect, I felt my stomach drop about 6 floors. He admitted it. That was the thing that knocked the air out of me. He didn't even try to deny it. He leaned forward, both palms flat on the table, and he said, "She had nowhere to go. She was going through something real, and I couldn't just watch her suffer." His voice was gentle, earnest even, like he was describing a rescue. Then he said the sentence, the one I want you to hear clearly. "It's not like I was sleeping with her." As if that were the bar, as if the bar were simply not sleeping with her, as if everything below that bar was just called kindness. I let him finish his whole speech. Then I asked the second question, the quieter one, the one I already knew the answer to, and asked anyway because I needed to hear what he'd do with it. "Where did the money come from, Camilo?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The earnestness flickered. And in that pause, that 3-second pause where he was visibly sorting through which version to offer me, I understood that there was no innocent answer. The money came from our household account, the household account that I, with my 2 jobs and my 53-hour weeks and my Saturday morning pharmacy shifts, had been keeping above water while he explained away the shortfalls as just the economy, just bad timing, just a rough patch. He recovered, I'll give him that. He recovered fast. He straightened up and said he had managed the account and made a judgment call. He said, and I want you to hear this part slowly, he said he knew I wouldn't have agreed, which is why he didn't ask, but that he also knew if I really understood the situation, I would have wanted him to help her. He said this with the full confidence of someone who has just explained that he lied to me because he understood my values better than I did. Tiffany made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I felt something go very cold and very clear in my chest at the same time. And then I did the math, out loud right there because I needed to hear it in the room. I picked up the pharmacy job 8 months ago. Camilo had come to me in October, I remember, because the heat hadn't turned on yet and we were both in sweaters. And he said money was tight, the account was low, he wasn't sure why, probably just the economy. And I said, okay. And I picked up the Saturday shifts and I gave up my mornings and I drove to that pharmacy every weekend at 7:30 in the dark. For 8 months, every single Saturday morning that I worked, I was paying for an apartment I had never seen for a woman whose name I only knew from a 3-year-old conversation on a couch I was still sitting on. I said it quietly. I wasn't yelling. I was saying, I want you to know that. I said, you took my overtime and gave it to your ex. And he said, that is not what happened. And I said, then tell me what happened. And he started to speak, stopped, tried another angle, stopped again, because there was no version of the story where the math worked differently. The money left our account every month. I put money into our account every weekend. He knew about both of those things and said nothing to me about either of them for 8 months. There are only so many ways to arrange those facts, and every arrangement points at the same answer. That's when he pivoted. I've heard about this move. I've seen it happen to other people. I just didn't recognize it in real time when it was aimed at me. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about the money. It was about my emotional state. I was overreacting. I was making it about the ex when it was really about his capacity for compassion. And then he brought up the mental health stuff, the stress of me pushing him about work, the way I'd been pulling away lately. He stood up and started pacing and said the word unfair 3 times in 90 seconds, and I sat there watching him turn himself into the person this had happened to. It would have worked on me 6 months ago, maybe even 3. Tiffany let him finish. She waited until the room went quiet, and then she said, one sentence, very flat, very calm, "You've been living in her house, spending her money, and giving it to another woman. What are we defending right now?" She wasn't cruel about it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She wasn't even mean. She was just clear in the way that people who love you are clear when they've run out of patience for watching you get lost. Camilo turned to look at her, then he looked at me. And for the first time all night, he had nothing to say. And that question, are you really going to let her speak for you, landed the way he intended it to, like a small needle, like a reminder that I was supposed to be embarrassed. But I looked at Tiffany, who had driven across town on her Saturday, who had read 8 months of statements with a highlighter and a quiet fury she kept entirely in check, and I thought she said the true thing. She said the thing I had been rotating around for over a year without ever letting myself land on it. I turned back to Camilo and I said, she didn't speak for me, she just said it faster. That was the moment I felt the shift. Not anger, something colder and much more certain than anger. I asked to see his phone, not screaming. I just held out my hand. He hesitated, maybe 2 seconds, long enough. Then he unlocked it and passed it across the table, and I pulled up the thread with Yvette. They were long messages, warm, the kind you write to someone you've been editing yourself around someone else to keep. There was a voice memo he'd sent her. I didn't play it, just saw the timestamp. 3 weeks ago, the same week, he told me I wasn't affectionate enough. I scrolled until I'd seen enough, and then I stopped scrolling because I didn't need more. I had exactly what I needed. I handed the phone back. He was watching my face the way people watch a weather system, trying to calculate which way it was going to move. I didn't cry. I'd been half expecting to, honestly, because I still loved him. Some dumb, loyal part of me still did. But what I felt instead was tired. A very specific tired. The kind that comes when you finally stop holding something heavy and realize how long your arms have been shaking. I told him to sleep on the couch. I told him we would talk about his timeline tomorrow. He said my name, just my name once, like a question, and I walked out of the kitchen. Tiffany stayed. We ended up on the kitchen floor. I don't know whose idea it was, maybe neither of us. It just happened that way. Like sitting at the table still felt too formal for what we were actually doing, which was grieving. She had her mug, I had mine, and we sat against the cabinet with the papers still up on the table above us and the apartment very quiet. I told her I didn't know how to feel sad about losing someone, when the main thing I felt was relief. And she said, "That's not confusion, honey. That's your body telling you the truth." I sat with that for a long time. Tiffany didn't go home until well past midnight, and she spent most of that time at the table, not on the floor, phone camera out, photographing each statement in order, flat, no shadows, organized. She had the small claims framework sketched out by 11:30, not because she's a lawyer, but because she'd done this before. Not for herself, for the 3 or 4 women in her life she had refused to watch get quietly walked over and handed nothing on the way out. That is who Tiffany is. She photographs your evidence, and she drafts your timeline, and she does not mention it again until you're ready. I am still not done being grateful. The next morning, I woke up and wrote the letter at the kitchen table before he came out of the living room. Typed it, actually, 2 short paragraphs. Notice to vacate 14 days, dated, with Tiffany's name below mine as a witness because she'd slept in my guest room and was eating toast in my kitchen when I printed it. When Camilo read it, he went through several expressions before landing on wounded. He said, "I can't believe you're doing this." And I heard myself say, very quietly, "I can't believe it took me this long." That wasn't a line I'd prepared. It just came out true. He left on day 9. Didn't say much, just moved efficiently, which I'll note he had never done a single other thing efficiently in the 14 months he'd lived here without a job. The gray hoodie went. The joggers went. The gym bag that had been on my kitchen floor since Saturday finally went. He left a folded note on the counter. An old habit of his, little messages, little gestures, the charming boyfriend residue, and I picked it up and put it in the trash without opening it. Not out of spite. I just genuinely didn't need to know what it said. That part of the story was already finished. The following week, I called my pharmacist manager, a man named Gerald who had never once questioned why a hospital billing specialist was working his Saturday mornings, and I gave him my 2 weeks' notice on the weekend shifts. He said he was sorry to lose me. I said I was sorry I'd needed the hours. My first free Saturday, I slept until 9 a.m., not 9:15, 9. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone and laughed. 8 months I had been up at 6 a.m. on Saturdays to cover a shortfall that had a name and an address across town. That Saturday I just didn't, and it felt like putting down something I didn't even know I'd been carrying. The small claims case is filed. I don't expect to win. He called the transfers a gift. I have nothing on paper that says otherwise, and he knows it. But Tiffany said something when we walked up those courthouse steps that I've been turning over ever since. She said, "The filing isn't for the money. The filing is the record. It says this happened. It says it wasn't free." And I thought about all the ways I had let things not be on record, the loans I didn't track, the shifts I picked up without telling him why, the arguments I backed down from to protect his mental health. The filing was the first thing I refused to let disappear. I keep coming back to that word, the one Camilo floated through mutual friends when I asked him to get a job. Gold digger. He said it about me, about the woman who owned the apartment he lived in, who worked 2 jobs to cover a shortfall she couldn't explain, who kept picking up extra shifts for a household that turned out to be running a secret 3rd address. I say the word out loud sometimes now, alone in my living room, and then, I laugh. Because I wasn't the one doing the mining, I just didn't realize for 8 months that I was the vein. So here's the question Camilo never thought to ask himself. AITA for wanting a partner who doesn't siphon your overtime into someone else's rent and then call it kindness? I know my answer. I knew it the second I sat on that kitchen floor with Tiffany and felt, underneath all the grief, an overwhelming and slightly embarrassing wave of relief. You are not wrong for wanting basic honesty about shared money. You are not wrong for doing the math. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, recognizing your own kitchen table in this story, the unexplained shortfall, the convenient excuse, the person you keep extending grace to while your Saturdays disappear, please, for the love of everything, let Tiffany look at the statements. So here's what I need to know. Was Renata wrong to end it without giving him one last chance to explain? Or would you have packed his bags the second you saw that name on the statement? Drop your verdict below.